Hello, and welcome to Candidates Up Front. This is a public interest election program from Berks Community Television and the League of Women Voters of Berks County. I'm Judith Cranus, a member of the League. Our November 8th election is coming up. This is the election where we vote for state and federal officials, and the deadline to register is October 24th, but please do so earlier. It's an important thing to do. The League is interviewing candidates, at least those who want to be interviewed, in contested races. For each race, the candidates will get the same basic questions and will have the same amount of time to answer them. Two candidates are competing in the 6th congressional district, Chrissy Houlihan, and she's the Democrat, and Republican Guy Cherokee. This district is the southern section of Berks County, stretching from Carnarvon through Exeter, the city of Reading, Wyomissing, and Spring, and south to New Morgan. And it also includes part of Chester County. Now, Congress is the U.S. House of Representatives. It proposes and passes federal laws, which must also be approved by the U.S. Senate. Congress acts on domestic and international issues. The Congresspeople serve a 2-year term. Their salary is $174,000 per year, plus benefits and expenses. Now, please remember that the opinions expressed in this interview are those of the candidate, not necessarily the opinions of the League of Women Voters or of Berks Community Television. Our interview today is with Mr. Cherokee. Welcome.
Hello.
Please tell our viewers about yourself and why you are running.
Sure. Well, Judith, thanks for having me. I chose to run for Congress because, like many of us, I felt as though everything was spinning out of control. I felt as though our economy was weak and getting weaker, that crime was on the rise, and that we weren't sure that our kids were really learning what they needed to learn. In essence, everything that's sort of a cornerstone of our society felt as though it was spinning out of control and falling apart. Now, I don't claim to have all the answers. But as a former president of my county chamber, I saw what was happening to small businesses. As a former prosecutor, I know that we can fight back against violent crime. And as a parent, as a dad, and as a Little League softball coach, I know we can do better for our children. I decided to step forward because I felt as though Washington was no longer using common sense, not really focused on getting results, and rather just trying to advocate party agendas. I think we need to return back to common sense, to focus on the things that matter, to focus on getting our economy up and running, especially our small businesses, to make sure that we fight back against violent crime so that people can move in their cities, and that our children are in school, seeing each other face to face and learning the things they need to succeed. In short, we need to restore the American dream. I want to be part of that.
Thank you. Now, you're running as a Republican. What draws you to that party?
So while neither party is perfect, the Republican Party to me stands for a few things that are appealing. First and foremost, an appeal to common sense, an idea that if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and try to do no harm. In other words, before we undertake to take one more dollar out of someone's pocket or create a new government agency or a new government regulation, we should give pause. Is it really something the government should do? And will taking that dollar from someone's paycheck really do them better or not? Should we not allow decisions to be made more locally in our community or even by a family? So in general, I believe in smaller government, more efficient government, and trusting decisions among families or local communities.
And are there things about your party that you're not comfortable with?
Oh, sure. I always say, you don't agree with anybody 100% of the time, except my wife, because she's always right. Look, I think that both parties make mistakes when they use their platforms not as a guidepost, but as a strict standard, one you're not allowed to express differences with. So I'm uncomfortable with times in my party where we don't allow discussion and we expect blind loyalty, but I'm troubled by the other party for that as well. One of the reasons I chose to run is I think that our current member of Congress has chosen to be too supportive of her party. I would try to approach this with a common sense approach built around my party platform, but ultimately doing what I thought was right.
Now, in Congress, as you just mentioned, the party always wants you to vote the party line, and people who voted for you will want you to vote what they believe. And the people who did not vote for you will also expect you to represent their views, plus you have your own ideas. How do you balance all these expectations? Tell us your thinking process.
When you say it like that, it's quite a challenge. So I think to be an effective legislator, there's a mix of leadership and representation. By that I mean each person running and each person serving has a series of life experiences in his or her own perspective. And at the end of the day, as a legislator, you have to vote your conscience. You have to believe that what you're voting for or voting against is in the best interest to advance our community, advance society. I think your party and those values are a guidepost, but again, not something that are strictly there. My approach would be to, first and foremost, vote my conscience, but to always be open to listening to the views from the community and to always convey to the folks here in our district why I voted for something. I think those are the hallmarks. Common sense, using your conscience, but most of all communication, so that you're getting input from citizens, but also citizens know why you did what you did so they can understand and we can have a good discussion about it. Most of all, we need to instill trust, and that comes through communication.
Thank you. What is important to you in foreign policy? And we do need to keep moving along here.
Sure. I think the most important part of foreign policy is the United States has to be clear on what our goals and objectives are. We have to speak clearly, first and foremost, from Washington. We have to speak clearly to the citizens of the United States. All of our citizens should understand what our priorities are, what our values, what we view as vital interest. We must also speak clearly to the outside world. It's important that our enemies and our allies know where do we intend to draw lines in the sand? When do we intend to help? When will we step back? When will we take a leading role and a supportive role? The most important thing we need in our foreign policy is that it's based on America's interest and those of our allies, and that we articulate it clearly and that we follow it. The world is a safer place when America is strong economically, strong militarily, but most of all when we state what we believe and then we do as we say. Then both our enemies and our allies know where we stand, and our citizens can have faith that what we're doing in our foreign policy is in the best interest of the nation.
Now, everyone I know is pro-life, but it means something different to every person. Ending gun violence would be pro-life, preventing climate change, protecting endangered species, being against abortion, being in favor of choice on abortion, universal health care, ending the death penalty, all could be pro-life positions. On which of these issues or other issues do you consider yourself pro-life?
Wow, that's a lot there.
We did put a lot in, sorry.
That's okay. So, look, traditionally people view the issue of pro-life in the context of abortion issues, but for those that see it in a broader context, it means and should mean what it literally means to be pro-life, to try and do those things that encourage life, healthy life, prolonging life, and establishing a stable society where we can have a good quality of life. And to me, it is that sort of, womb to tomb, if you will, from start to finish. That being, to be pro-life is to encourage the birth of children. It's to make sure that the moms have the information and care they need. It's to make sure that during life that young children are given access to quality education. That's why I support school choice. I want every child to have access to a school that allows them to succeed. We want to make sure that people have the tools, that young people learn the skills they need to succeed so that they can have a good quality of life. And as we get older in age, to make sure that we have access to the health care we need to have a good quality of life. And that throughout that continuum, from start to finish, that we have access to information. So to me, to be pro-life is to support life. It's also to support innocent life. It is why I feel so strongly about violent crime. It's why I think that we need to protect innocent people, whether they're shopkeepers or moms letting their kids out to play. It's why I feel so strongly as a former prosecutor that we need to do what we can to fight crime. To me, especially, when we talk about pro-life, it's ensuring that everyone has an opportunity to succeed. But most of all, that innocent life is protected and not subject to violence, undue harm, or discrimination. I think that should be everyone's goal.
The U.S. is a first world nation with third world statistics for the death rate of pregnant women. For every 100,000 women who are pregnant, in Norway and New Zealand, fewer than 2 die. Most of Europe and Australia, fewer than 4. Canada and France, fewer than 9. In the U.S., 23.8 of each 100,000 pregnant women died during or soon after pregnancy. And those numbers are expected to increase in places that abortion is banned. Should our federal government address pregnancy death rates? And we could put that under the guidelines to our constitutional preamble that we are to promote the general welfare. And what would you suggest we do to get these numbers down?
I think, Judith, the question you raised goes even deeper. I think, unfortunately, as a result of the last few years, as we went through the pandemic, there's a lack of trust in the information put out by the federal government. So to try and improve the quality of life, whether it's to offer support to moms that are pregnant or anyone making life and death decisions, first and foremost, we need to restore trust. We need to get back to a place where we can all believe in, trust, and use the guidance offered by whether it's the CDC or the FDA. One of the things the next Congress has to do is to work with the executive branch to make sure that people believe, that we as citizens all believe, that the information coming out of Washington is not based on political objective, but are based on substance. So in restoring that trust, then I think what we need to do is make sure that the federal government's role is to provide the information necessary so that not only individuals, but the states, because ultimately the best way to care for people is at a local level. It would be virtually impossible for Congress to try and create a bureaucracy or a set of rules that would work just as well in Reading as they would in rural communities in Montana and New York City. The federal government needs to provide good, bona fide information that we can all use as guideposts to make the decisions we need.
Thank you. To get in all of our questions, we're going to have to ask our timekeeper to keep shorter times on each one, I think. I'm going to go to the Constitution again. In Europe, the religion of the king, of course, was the only religion. And our founding fathers wanted our government to be neutral on religion. When Roe v. Wade was decided, it used a medical term, viability. Survival outside the womb was the criteria, and that's pretty much neutral. Some of the new laws we've seen in some of the states that are banning abortion are seen by many as enshrining in law a religious view of when life begins. And they see it as government intrusion on religious freedom, which is a First Amendment right. If you were having a heart-to-heart discussion with someone who felt that way, what would you say to them?
I think the solace we should all take out of the Dobbs decision is that now there's an opportunity for every state to have a discussion on what standards they want. Here in Pennsylvania, last year, there were nearly 31,000 abortions. I would think that almost all of us would like to find a way for that number to get lower, for more lives to be preserved. And there's a number of ways we can do that. In order to really think it through, we need to look at the ways that are common sense and effective to support moms in crisis pregnancy. The Dobbs decision gives us an opportunity to have local decisions because I think it's virtually impossible to have a one-size-all solution. We neither want California nor Mississippi to tell us what we're going to do here in Pennsylvania.
If the issue you were talking with a constituent on was gun violence and you had suggested something to lessen gun violence, and that person said that infringes on my Second Amendment right to carry guns, in a heart-to-heart discussion, what would you say to them?
Sure. So I think on so many of these cultural issues that have caused so much tension, we have to find where we have common ground. As I said on the life issue, I'm pro-life, but I want to look for a way we can find standards that will save lives where there's consensus. On the issue of guns, the same thing. We're all horrified when we see the violence in schools. There are countless things we can do to make schools safer, to make children safer, from security cameras to security doors to having police officers or security officer on staff. So what I would say to someone who's concerned is that let's find a way where those of us who are genuinely concerned about reducing violence can find commonality. Right now we've presented too many complicated issues as binary choices. You're pro-life or pro-choice. You're pro-gun or anti-gun. If we're going to move this country forward, we have to go back to finding where there's overlap, where we have agreement and move it forward. There's certainly a number of things we can do to make schools and communities safer that don't infringe on anyone's rights.
You led me right into the next question. Gun violence is costing us $557 billion annually. And that includes outfitting and training first responders against new and improved weapons, retrofitting buildings, as you've mentioned, and health care. And I was surprised to learn that 96% of gun violence-related health care is shouldered by Medicare, which is our taxes, and U.S. employers through their health insurance plans. So gun violence is an inflationary pressure, actually. Should Congress act, and what do you feel Congress should do to lessen this cost to our
Sure.
economy?
Again, Judith, on this with so many other issues, I think we have to find consensus. It'd be very easy for us to sort of drop into two camps. Pro-gun and anti-gun, and 90% of the members of Congress could go into those two camps and we can shout at each other, or we can try and find common ground. I think where there's a good deal of common ground is fighting violent crime. We've seen in just my lifetime, I'm old enough to remember and seen this cycle before. Our cities became places that were unsafe, and then we used common sense, supportive ways to help our police officers to reduce crime. We're now back in a period of violent crime spiking. I think we need to go back to that. The federal government should make sure that the money, any dollar we take out of someone's pocket that Washington uses for fighting crime is used for fighting crime. We need to make sure that we're supporting the communities that are fighting back, and Congress also should use its historic role of having hearings, of highlighting what works and what doesn't. That's one of the roles Congress has, to say this is a community where there's community policing and tactics being used that should be an example for all of us. If we find places in America that have reduced crime, Congress should be highlighting them and using the men and women on those front lines to be experts elsewhere. We can find lots of ways to reduce crime if we just put aside the partisanship and look at common sense, effective ways to reduce violence.
Congress recently passed a bill to address climate change, and it was not bipartisan. Wildfires, floods, and drought are expensive emergencies to deal with, and then there's the added expense of rebuilding. So again, it can be an inflationary pressure on our economy. From a cost-benefit perspective, are we doing the right thing?
Well, I would have to take a moment to say that the shame of it is that what you rightfully described as a climate change bill was recently passed and told us that it was the Inflation Reduction Act. I think if we're going to have an honest discussion as citizens on how to reduce inflation, or how to reduce gun violence, or how to address the climate, we should be honest. We should invite citizens of goodwill on all sides to come together. My frustration begins with that a bill that was really geared to ostensibly help the climate was wrapped in a phrase of Inflation Reduction Act. There are things we can do to both improve our economy and improve our climate. And we've again put these in choices. It's an either or. That's a false choice. We can move to a vibrant American energy, and we can make our air cleaner. It's not an either or. There are certainly things that we can do, and if we do them smartly, we can create jobs, improve the quality of air, and also make our nation more secure. It begins with using the natural gas that's here in Pennsylvania that burns cleaner, provides jobs, and makes us energy independent. That's something that I think most of us can rally around.
Thank you. Companies donate unregulated dollars to political causes as a form of protected free speech. The public cannot see these donations. And some say that fossil fuel company donations influenced legislators to vote no on the recent climate bill. Do you think campaign contributions influence votes? And please tell us what you think about the campaign finance laws.
Wow, you jam-pack a lot of information into a question.
We do.
So there's a lot there. So let's talk about the interest of campaigns. Look, I think that what we need to have is disclosure so that people know who's contributing to whom and people know where the contributions are coming from. I'm a big proponent on whether the issue is the environment, education, crime, or you name it. We need more transparency. We need more information. This way we can make informed decisions. We know what our legislators are thinking. We know where the information comes from. My concern is whenever those things are hidden. The federal laws are fairly good. in terms of that, but of course there are loopholes and we need to learn from those loopholes. But again, at the end of the day, people should take notice. You know, my opponent and I, our campaign reports are there online. Folks can see them. You can see who's donated to us. She's been very successful in raising money out of state. I haven't been as successful. I've raised more money locally. And voters then can draw the conclusions for that. So across the board on all the issues we've talked about, the federal government needs to make sure that information is transparent and available so that people can make informed choices about the candidates and then informed decisions about how the candidates are behaving, and then ask us all questions. Ultimately, we need transparency and accountability.
Thank you. Now we have just a basic question. Tell us your thoughts on the filibuster.
Yeah, I actually wrote a column in the Philadelphia Inquirer about 2 years ago on the filibuster. I believe it's very important. I believe it's very important because it ensures that ultimately the majority gets its way, but the minority has its say, and it ensures that we try and form consensus. When we do big things, when we try to create new agencies, impose major taxes, restructure government, there are those moments where we should pause, where ours is not a government that should happen in rapid fire. We should be thoughtful about it and build consensus. That's been the historical role of the Senate for over a century. It's where we try to form consensus. So to cut off the filibuster means to reduce the minority to no role. We've had too many bills passed the last 2 years where the House has passed bills with all Democrats and no Republicans, and the Senate has passed bills 50-50 with the Vice President Harris casting the deciding vote. We should look for consensus, especially on big things. As you now know, Judith, the federal government's starting to spend billions, or money by the trillions, not billions. It would be nice if we all paused and had people on board. The federal government did try and help all of us during the lockdowns. The first round of aid was passed almost universally or unanimously. That's important. The filibuster is sort of a mechanism that forces consensus, and whenever we can find consensus on major initiatives, we should find it.
Thank you. Tell us your thoughts, please, on the Electoral College.
I think the Electoral College is an imperfect but great idea. It ensures that every state has a say. It ensures that the citizens of each part of this country, rural, suburban, urban, mountain, West Coast, East Coast, have a say. We've seen the tendency later, as the parties have begun to splinter, as the media has begun to splinter, a sense that the heartland feels detached from the coasts, that even in Pennsylvania, that we feel detached from our rural communities, from our city. I think we need to find a way to bring people back and have dialogue. I think the Electoral College is a tool in doing that. There is a genuine concern I have that neither party, that each of the parties would begin to ignore states without it. It brings about consensus. It also makes sure that no one state or one constituency can have undue weight. Again, it is imperfect, but it is a necessary tool, again, towards building consensus and keeping us united as a nation.
Thank you. I've lived in many states. Some make it easy to register to vote. Some make it easy to cast a ballot. Some states, your vote is more powerful, depending on how much you're gerrymandered and things like that. And all that changes as time we move state to state. As critical as the vote is to the American concept of democracy, should there be federal standards that protect our vote no matter where we live?
I don't think we need the federal government to play any larger role in our lives. I don't think we need the federal government to pass new laws on top of new laws. The last thing we need is to grow the power of federal government and have them involved in school board races or city council races. Look, at the end of the day, what we have here in Berks County, what we have here in Pennsylvania are based upon rules and standards passed by the legislature. If going well, they're passed by the legislature, supported by the governor, and put into effect by our county commissioners. That keeps everyone accountable. The last thing we need is to have Washington begin to regulate how we have township races or city council races. I trust us locally to find it. And if we're concerned or we think a process is unfair or burdensome, that should be addressed locally. I don't want us to have to go to Washington to ask us how do we run city council races.
Okay, we have about 30 seconds for this last question. And it's about the Federal Reserve Bank was designed by Alexander Hamilton to handle monetary policy. It is not in the Constitution, but it is the driving force, the main engine in dealing with inflation. Congress, we know on its own, cannot solve inflation, which is why we didn't really ask you how you would do that. But should Congress consider the inflationary or deflationary aspects of every bill it considers? And if so, how far forward should we look? And we have about 30 seconds for this.
Congress absolutely should be aware of that. In the last 18 months, the United States government, in the guise of aid, has spent more money in the pandemic and post-pandemic in 18 months than we typically spend to fund the entire government. That's caused inflation. And anyone who doesn't recognize that adding $5 trillion on top of $4 trillion in that short period of time doesn't understand basic economics. Congress should absolutely. Inflation is the cruelest tax. It steals money out of your paycheck. It eats away at your savings. We are now spending money by the trillions. That was a term I hadn't heard until a year ago. Congress, job one of the next Congress needs to be to fighting inflation. And going forward, we all need to be mindful of it because it impacts every one of us.
And we have 15 seconds left for you to make a closing statement. Quick 15, though, because I have some things to tell
My
voters.
name's Guy Shiraki. I formerly served as the CEO of the Chester County Chamber. I was a prosecutor. I'm a dad. I'm a Little League softball coach. I gave up those things to run for Congress because everything's spinning out of control. I don't have all the answers, but I have a common sense approach built upon my experience. I wanted to put it to work for us to find real solutions to the real problems we have. I know they're real because I live here too. If you'd like to learn more or want to help, please find me at my webpage, OurGuyForCongress.com. Thank you, Judith.
Thank you, Mr. Shiraki, for sharing your views with us. And viewers, please remember there is another candidate for the 6th Congressional District, Chrissy Houlihan. And you can see that interview on BCTV's website or YouTube page. To check your voting status, go to votepa.gov. You can register, change your party, locate your polling place, or apply for an absentee or mail-in ballot. The deadline to register is October 24th. The deadline to apply for a mail-in ballot is November 1st, but do it well ahead of that. It's best policy. Then check the League's online voters guide, vote411.org. You can confirm your voting district, and it's a new district this year, and get more information on the candidates and a link to the website that Mr. Shiraki just mentioned. If you have an issue and you want to talk to our county election services, their email is elections@countyofberks.com. Their phone number and a real person answers in English or Spanish, whichever you prefer, 610-478-6490. Thank you for watching Candidates Up Front. I'm Judith Cranis. Good day.